Howdy, everybody. My name is Brent Veazey. I'm the Montgomery County Forward Party Chair, and today I am here to talk to you about inflation. Yes, it's on everybody's mind. What can we do about it? What's going on? What's causing it? All of these things. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin in economics, and I also have a master's degree in international economics from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. For these reasons, the Forward Party thought that I might be able to talk intelligently about inflation. So here we go. Let's start with some basics. Inflation. What is it, generally speaking? Well, it's the rate that prices are rising. In our economy, we want prices to rise because that's showing that we have a good, healthy economy, okay? But we don't want things to rise too fast on prices. In our free market system, we have supply, which is the amount of things that we have out there that we can have to access of something, and we have demand of something, which is the amount of that product or service that we want. So supply and demand are the two basic premises that's behind our inflation issue that we have. Ideally, in a free market system, you want them to be something called equilibrium, okay? Equilibrium means that the supply of something matches the demand for something. And because of that, prices are going to be stable. When we start to get out of that equilibrium, because the demand for it starts to change by going up or down, or if the supply of something changes by going up or down, then that will force the price to change accordingly, depending on where these lines end up crossing. In general, in our economy, we have inflation that's either demand-driven or supply-driven. That's basically the simple part of it. But sometimes it's not quite that simple, depending on what's going on out there. Demand-driven inflation, something new comes out, big buzz about it, people want to have it, they go and get it. That's demand. It can also be pent up. We experienced this not too long ago once the pandemic ended. Remember, we were all in our houses and we were isolated and we really couldn't get out because of COVID. And all of a sudden, when COVID started to lessen up, we started to get out, and then we were like, okay, we got to do stuff. I got to get stuff. I need things. I need to buy things, right? So we had a big demand-driven slice of inflation pop up. At the same time, because of COVID, we had issues with having our shelves stocked properly because A, we weren't all back to work. B, we didn't have everyone back into the transportation system to get things to and from where they were being manufactured and into the stores. And then C, all of the above. We kind of had a little bit of a perfect storm at the end of COVID and at the end of the pandemic. So we had some supply shortages. We had a little bit of demand pent up because we couldn't get out and do things. That sent prices up. Since then, that dichotomy has been trying to calibrate itself. Supplies have been trying to increase. Demand has been trying to level off, partly because the one thing that government can do when it comes to this situation is money supply, the supply of money that's out there in the country. They can manage that, and they do that through monetary policy by raising or lowering interest rates. That is what the Federal Reserve has been doing. They've been trying to raise interest rates to make it a little bit more expensive for us to borrow money to go and do some things on credit that we have been doing. And the thought is that when you do that, then people are going to be less likely to be having that demand to be able to buy things out there in the economy. That tries to lower the demand back into an equilibrium position with supply. That is what government really can do, is affect the demand side of this equation. On the supply side, that gets a lot more tricky for the government's involvement because, generally speaking, we have private entities that are out there making things for us, providing services for us. And those private entities, they aren't really as influenced by whatever the government does. Maybe from a cost perspective, with some things that government may do from a regulation perspective, potentially. But for the most part, the government doesn't have very much influence at all on the supply of things. That's why supply inflation is hard to be able to address. When you have a lack of supply of something, and it's a private market economy like ours is, it's really controlled by those private entities that are doing the production of these items, products, or services. Government can't really change much on the supply side of that type of inflation. We've seen that a lot with what's happened in our food sector. We've had shortages because of various things happening with bird flu on chickens. We've had some issues with meat. We've had other issues with supply happening with shortages from rice because they had a massive flood in India, the world's largest producer of rice, that got rid of their entire exportable supply of rice, so that had to be removed from the marketplace. We've had a war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. Both of those nations are two of the world's biggest suppliers of grains, which goes into the cost for feeding cows, which goes into bread and other things that we use for those types of products that we consume and eat. That's where a lot of our food situations on inflation has come from, is on the supply side of things. That is slowly being addressed over time and has started to kind of sort itself out, level out, and in many cases start to come back down. Consumer inflation has been addressed with the higher interest rates that we all are paying. But some other things that's going on in the economy that is impacting inflation is also regarding what's going on in our houses. How much it costs to buy a house, how much it costs to rent an apartment or a house. Those prices are still doing the upward rise. And the reason for that, supply shortages. We're going to talk about that in another video pretty soon. But the bottom line here is that all of this has resulted in us now having a 3% inflation rate. That's basically what we're at right now. The Federal Reserve says that their target is a 2% rate. We've had some wholesale prices go as low as 2.5%. Wholesale is the amount of inflation that the producers of items are paying for the inputs they use into those items that we are buying, okay? Regardless of whether it's a service from a doctor or from a lawyer or anybody providing a service or a product. But all of that's been down to about 2.5%. It is still higher than what we've had in the past, but historically, 3% has been what's been the mark of a healthy economy. Say, well, it's still 3%. Every year, that's prices going up, and in some instances, it's higher than that. What do we do, Brent? Well, I don't know. That's a tough one. But it can be worse. Worldwide, right now, the inflation rate is somewhere in the ballpark of 6.5%. If you take everyone's inflation rates around the world and average them together, it's about 6.5%. There are some countries that are even much worse than that. Imagine if you were in Argentina. Argentina has their annual inflation rate of 254%. There's other countries around the world that are in the double digits. Sometimes perspective helps. And that's another part of inflation, is psychology. Sometimes we make things out to be worse than they are. Sometimes we make things better than they are. Psychology can play a role in how we perceive inflation, okay? And it can depend on the type of inflation that we're having to deal with most, depending on our individual circumstances, or it can just depend on how we're feeling on a daily basis. Whatever it is, psychology is another important component of inflation that we have to deal with and realize is real. Okay? The fundamentals are supply and demand. Government can impact demand quite a bit. They do that with monetary policy, raising, lowering interest rates. Okay? Supply, that's a lot more tricky. And if we have supply shortages for things, government gets a lot more difficult on being able to impact that with any of its actions on the supply side. And that's a stickier type of inflation that we're seeing a little bit in the housing market. There can still be solutions for that, and I'll talk about that in an upcoming video for sure on that side of things. Hope you found this very interesting and informative. Please come back and check us out again in the future. We've got all kinds of great information coming from the Forward Party here in Texas. I'm Brent Veazey, Chair of the Montgomery County Forward Party. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Have a great one. Take care. Goodbye.